1987, hundreds of NES controllers were thrown against walls. It wasn't because of a boss or a trap or some other challenge. It was because of two regular enemies. Two enemies so hard that they make the bosses of this game seem like nothing at all. Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link is probably the hardest Zelda game ever created. It changed the formula up from the first game with a more challenging side-scrolling adventure, and it remains a very underrated game. But man, it was hard as hell. When I was a kid, there was always a certain part that was nearly impossible. Death Mountain comes to mind, also when you get stuck trying to get out of that room with the lion heads, or when you're on the path to the Grand Palace. But none of that compares to two enemies you find later in the game. The Iron Knuckle was one of those enemies. Like most enemies in Zelda 2, they come in different flavors. The orange and red Iron Knuckles present a great challenge. They move their shields up and down to counter your strikes, and they're also pretty aggressive and would chase after you. And then there are the blue ones. The blue Iron Knuckles just plain sucked. When you first met him, it was in the Island Palace, and you're fairly weak, so it took a lot of hits to take these guys down. To top it off, these Iron Knuckles can shoot sword beams across the room. Like with most enemies, you have two options. You either fight or you flee. The hard part about fleeing is a lack of space to get around these enemies. Usually when you come across a blue Iron Knuckle, it's in a corridor, so it's impossible to get around them without sustaining a lot of damage. You might get lucky and find a pit behind your little friend. This is only in one instance though. That usually means you have to face them no matter what. Luckily, like most enemies, they have a pattern. Slashing at the head is the best option here. After you get in one hit, back off because the Iron Knuckle is going to go ballistic for a few seconds. After he calms down, you move in again for another strike. You repeat this until you win. There are 3 Iron Knuckles in the Island Palace, 1 in the Maze Palace, 5 in the Sea Palace, and a whopping 9 in the 3-Eye Rock Palace. Now you might be asking yourself, aren't there any in the Grand Palace? No, the developers considered the Iron Knuckles to be too weak to be in the final level of the game. Along with a bunch of upgraded enemies, you'll find a few new enemies, including the Fokka. I can't think of another single enemy in the entire Legend of Zelda series that causes more trouble for people than the Fokka. I wish I was exaggerating, but these guys are really hard. Imagine a blue Iron Knuckle, but tougher and agile with the ability to jump. It's just devastating. Just like the Iron Knuckle, they come in different colors. The red Fokka are just as strong as the blue, but if you're fully powered up to level 8, they only take about 2 hits. The blue Fokka take about 4 hits. There are 4 blue Fokka in the Grand Palace, and there's a quick strategy for beating a couple of them. You'll find that a wall of blocks happens to be right before you meet 2 of the blue ones. Nailing down 4 blocks up will give you a perfect angle to strike at the jumping bastard. Be careful because he can still hit you. But what do you do when the wall isn't available? Well, there isn't a clear strategy to defeat these guys in a fair fight. If you stand still, they'll jump left and right every few seconds and continue to shoot swords at different heights. Your best bet is to try an upward thrust when the bird is overhead. If you get hit, which you will, take that chance to strike while you're invincible. It'll only be for a few seconds, but you can usually get a hit in. A final option is running. This isn't possible for the 2 near the stone walls, because you're not going to be able to break out quick enough. But there is one instance where running isn't a bad idea. If you're lucky, you'll get away before the bird's able to chase you up the stairs. So you've seen 2 of the hardest enemies in Zelda history. Sure, I've only touched the surface on annoying baddies in Zelda 2. But no 2 enemies give me more nightmares than the Knuckles and the birds.